czasie pandemii, kiedy wydawało się, że odetchniemy z ulgą, to okazało się, że wcale nie jest lepiej, a kto wie, czy nie jest gorzej. I o tym teraz będziemy mówić, a tę niełatwą rozmowę rozpocznie Magdalena Namysłowska z Warszawskiego Ośrodka Psychoterapii i Psychiatrii.
Today I'm going to talk to you about our mental health, and the way we function in the present reality. This reality I will call a post-pandemic, pandemic war reality. I am a doctor of psychiatry, so I treat and diagnose what is in part biological in our human being. That is to say, I analyze how the brain functions and how its functioning affects our body. I treat people with pharmacotherapy, so I prescribe the medication, but I am also a psychotherapist, so I explore how emotions affect our individual functioning, our well-being, and the way we behave in society, so in couples, friends, families, and work environment. When we think about our mental health, we think about the complex functioning of our emotions combined with the way our brain operates and how these two are connected to our body, but also how the mental health affects our relationships with others. Working with my patients in the office, I got an insight into the devastation that developed over the past 2.5 years. There is no doubt that our mental health is a subject to the impact of external conditions, such as brought by pandemic or the current war. When we talk about mental health, what are we actually talking about? Mental health is a dynamic inner state of balance which allows us to use our psychological abilities in harmony with universal social values. It is also the ability to recognize, express, and modulate our emotions, and also to feel and recognize those of others. When we feel good and stable, we have the elasticity, the flexibility to cope with adverse life effects, and also the ability to fulfill our social and family roles. It is also a harmonious relationship between the body and the mind. If we look from the perspective of the recent present, the time before pandemic presented itself, as Yuval Harari said also, the time of peace, prosperity, and for most it was very easy to predict how it will be. This era has ended. Back then, traveling, sightseeing, exploring, that was our everyday life, quite pleasant everyday life. If you look at this photo, it is a photo of my family in New York. You can see my sons who were given the opportunity to discover a very interesting, creative, and diverse world. Most of us, in this way or another, could take part in such activities, exploring. Most of us had the need to discover new possibilities, new places. Today is a different future. Looking at the difficulties that these 2 years brought up, and also now the time of the uncertainty about the war, it looks more like this, very lonely and empty. We often don't go anywhere. I also think that our space, the space for life, is in some ways shrinking. So what did we actually have to face in the past 2 years? We had to confront more emotions that I will define as critical emotions. Very often it was fear, anxiety, helplessness, the feeling of loss, grief, frustration, or even shame. In my opinion, in Poland, for the past 30 years, we are experiencing the feelings of helplessness and uncertainty about tomorrow, what it might bring. Think how many times each of you thought that the last wave of pandemic was really the last one, and that this nightmare is definitely going to end. None of us in the worst scenario thought that there would be war following and overlapping the pandemic. War that has brought aggression and inhumanity towards one another. I think that the word crisis became one of the most used words, crisis that touches mental health, geopolitical health, crisis of economic health in general. Crisis doesn't always have to bring destructive dimension. It can be a turning point in life, a decisive moment in dealing with tragedy, or a breakthrough point. We have all different coping mechanisms, and we differ in the way we use them. During the pandemic, my patients that reached out for help were often quite devastated. So they came and decided on some fundamental changes. Through the therapy, they learned how to get a knowledge about emotions and how to take care of their mental health. So let's look at this simple graph. It shows our life as a function of time. You can quickly identify where you are, how much time is ahead of you. And no matter how you look at it, it's very obvious that it's very measurable and finite. As we look at it one more time, in my mind, a very substantial question arises. Wouldn't it be worth living this life with the maximal comfort possible? Can we protect ourselves more actively, for example, our mental health and well-being, or will we fail to learn any lessons from the crisis and go back to the old ways of living by denying the threats of today's world? Obviously, we can't take anything for granted, but we can definitely change the attitude towards protecting ourselves. It seems that the crisis of the past 2.5 years has made us much more conscious and aware of our limitations and how fragile our mental health can be. No matter what our protective shields are, there is no doubt that the pandemic fully showed it, that our greatest protection is in our relationship with others. Through the lens of pandemic, we saw how two groups of people, teenagers and the old people, often deprived of contact with one another, suffered the most. The elderly became very lonely and very fearful of the risk to their health, while the young ones lost access to schools and to their friends and ended up locking themselves in their rooms or in the beds. Young people are the group that needs the most psychiatric and psychotherapeutical help now. If you think about them, these young people in 2-3 years will enter their adulthood. What will their state of mental health be? Will they have the desire to live, the willingness to develop, to work, to taste life? At the end, I would like to ask one fundamental question, or maybe a couple questions. What would promote good mental health and well-being? Would it be a conscious effort towards taking care of our mental health? Would it be a wide, non-stigmatized use of professional, psychological, or psychiatric care, perhaps care that is available in the workplace? Would it be an open attitude towards thinking about mental health generally, rather than just the category of mental illness? Or Maybe it would be through developing an ability to cope with emotions by knowing how to react quickly when mental discomfort comes. Taking care of our mental health shouldn't result in a fear of being exposed, but it should really represent a conscious choice of living a much better and more satisfying life. Thank you.